listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending part of your day with us. My name is Jerry Mitchell, your host for Give God 90. Myra is in her supervisor's seat.
Hi, everyone.
And we absolutely thank you once again for being with us. We were gone for a few days, so we're kind of attempting to catch up. And sometimes that is more difficult to be gone for a short time than for a long time.
Yes.
There's always something to do when you get back home. Anyway, if you haven't been to the website in the last week, I haven't had a chance to do anything with it, but it's there. Utilize it. There's all kinds of good stuff there. Have not gotten anything from the publisher on how many books were sold. I don't expect anything for that until January. It takes them a few days to get all their reports in and calculate all that stuff out. So we will know in a few weeks how many Bibles we'll be able to buy for people. If you like what you hear, chances are that your friends and family need to hear it, and your enemies really need to hear it too. So don't be afraid to hit the like button, the share button, and whatever platform you're using. We go out on a lot of platforms, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all of them. Do yourself and everybody else a favor and hit that subscribe button for us. Apparently, from the last episode we did, I should say, there were some questions about that. And along with those questions were some comments, some friendly, a couple not. They were convinced that this is what I said could not be the way it was. And we're going to address those things today. And of course, the main focus of that was Jude 1:3. And he writes, Beloved, although I made every effort to write to you about the salvation we share, although I did that, I felt it necessary to write and urge you to contend earnestly for the faith entrusted once for all the saints. Now, basically what he's saying is, before I get to anything else, I need to remind you. I need you to really consider this. You must strive for the faith that was entrusted to the saints. And I thought I explained in detail, who the saints were, what the faith is, and just about every word in that particular phrase. So, some of you were a little upset. Some of you were delighted that I actually came out and said that publicly. But a couple of you, honestly believe what you were taught, even though what you taught was wrong. Mark Twain said it's easier to fool someone than it is to convince someone they've been fooled. And that's what we're dealing with quite often when we talk about these things. Now, the primary concern for some of you was the confusion between the faith and the gospel. Okay? What Christians might consider the gospel. Jude was very precise when he wrote the faith. Something we believe, something we practice. And that was delivered or given to the saints, the holy people, as a group. Now, some contend, quite contentiously, that the faith is the gospel of Jesus. The birth, the death, the resurrection, right? Coming from a Christian viewpoint, I get it. I was there for a lot of years until I learned how to read. And yeah, I might get a little warm under the collar as I go through this. because this is pretty basic stuff here, okay? This is just pretty basic stuff. I actually wrote somebody back and I said, well, where's that found in the Bible? And of course, the answer I got, well, of course it's in Acts chapter 2. Well, if you read Acts chapter 2 carefully, it doesn't say anything about the saints being given anything. Okay? In fact, in Acts 2, the people questioned what was happening, and Peter begins his explanation of the events that had occurred in the previous weeks. Now, no place in that entire narrative does it refer to the people he was speaking to, and they were gathered there in the temple courtyard. All right, it doesn't say they were saints. It doesn't say they were holy people. It just says they were there. And by the way, I need to. I know I'm going to get questions if I don't clarify this. Okay, this did actually happen in the temple court, not the temple proper, but in the temple was a big place, and it tells us, if you read Acts, folks that are a little testy with me, probably unsubscribed and did all that good stuff, but that's okay. It tells you where they met regularly. It was in an area known as Solomon's Porch. It didn't happen in the upper room where the disciples would sleep. They would go to the temple every day in the same place, and at this point, we know there was more than 100 of them. Okay? And Solomon's Porch would have been big enough and sort of out of the way enough where they would meet, pray, discuss, probably argue a little bit, right? But that's where they would be. And so when everything that happened that day happened, it was in a public place. It wasn't in a small room where only 12 people could fit to sleep. It was in the big place. It was at the temple. And Peter's entire dissertation recaps the events of what happened for the past few weeks. There's nothing in there to describe any faith being delivered whatsoever. And what confuses people is, especially people who read this in English and get the pronouns mixed up, when Peter quotes from Joel, he would not have read it or said it the way we are used to saying it in English. Okay? I'm going to let Myra read this in English, but not the way you're used to. She's going to read it the way Peter would have recited it from memory. The way it was written, the way he was used to reading it, the way he was used to understanding it. So go ahead and read that portion out of Joel.
And afterward I will pour out my spirit to all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. Even on my men servants and maid servants, I will pour out my spirit in those days. I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and fearsome day of Jehovah. And everyone who calls on the name of Jehovah will escape, for on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be deliverance, as Jehovah has promised, among the remnant called by Jehovah. Joel 2, verse 28 through 32.
That's what Peter quotes in Acts chapter 2. Now, there's nothing in this that would indicate the birth, death, and resurrection of Yeshua, Jesus, right? There's nothing there. But he is speaking or writing as it's given to him, Joel. He's quoting Joel, who writes this down as it's given. And it starts, as he starts out, I will pour out my spirit. I will pour out the Creator's spirit. I will pour out Jehovah's spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. He goes down, on my men servants and maid servants, those who trust him completely, those who would be the ones who would practice the faith that was delivered to the holy ones in Deuteronomy 33. More on that in a few minutes. And of course, this is speaking of a future time. And as Peter goes through this and he begins to use this, it gets people's attention because now they understand he's not trying to replace the Almighty with anything or anyone else. He's saying we have got to get back to this faith. Right? Of course it's right, because that's what it says. Now, as he goes on, he quotes David. And this is kind of an interesting thing here, because this comes from David's Psalm 110:1. Go ahead and read that part.
Jehovah said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a stool for your feet.
That is as close to the original translation as I can get. Okay? The question of why David considered one of his descendants as Lord or Master was also the last question that the Pharisees would ever ask Yeshua, Jesus. In Matthew 22, Jesus quotes the same verse the same way, right? And he asked the Pharisees, now after he asked the Pharisees, whose son is the Messiah? And of course they answered, well, it's David's son, of course. And he uses this verse to confound them. Now, in the Hebrew custom, the elder is always the master, which is how we get the title Lord, right? And that's how it would have been used. David understood that after the resurrection, let me say that again, David understands after the resurrection of the dead, there would be no more father-son relationship because everybody would be equal, except for the one who deserved the recognition as Messiah. Now, I've got some folks out there going, huh? I can guarantee it. Let me say this again so that you plainly understand it. After the resurrection of the dead, you're no longer going to be considered fathers and sons. There's no marriage or giving in marriage in heaven, right? It's just not the way it works. You're all equal. Except for one. Well, technically two. God doesn't count here. Well, he does, but not in the way we're talking. The one who deserves the recognition of Messiah will be the head. Everybody else is on equal ground. Everybody else is on equal ground. But by using this verse, Yeshua rebukes the Pharisees' claim that a mere man could be the Messiah, because the Messiah needed to be resurrected and completely changed from a body of flesh to an incorruptible body, never to die again. Now, it was well known that people had been brought back from the dead. If you read, I think it's in 1 Kings or 2 Kings, where Elisha brings somebody back, right? The child of the Shunammite woman. It's all recorded. They knew these things. The people that Peter was talking to knew these things. The people of the time knew these things. They understood a little, probably better than we do. But unless you incorporate all of these things, you're going to miss the lessons that he's teaching. Now, Peter would absolutely not attempt to say that Yeshua was Jehovah. They would have stoned him for blasphemy. It's that simple. Everything would have stopped right there had Peter attempted to replace the Almighty with anyone or anything else. Everything Peter tells the crowd that day changed nothing of the faith that was delivered, but it did clarify what Jesus was teaching throughout his ministry. And everything that he taught came straight from the faith that was once delivered to the holy ones, exactly like it was recorded in Deuteronomy 33. Read part of that again.
And came with
myriads
of holy ones with flaming fire at his right hand. Surely you love the people. All the holy ones are in your hand, and they sit down at your feet. Each receives your words, the laws that Moses gave us, the possession of the assembly of Jacob. Deuteronomy 33, 2 through 4.
Now, even Paul used, in his letter to the Romans, I used that as another witness to this. And some of you wanted to argue with what Paul wrote. What's the value of being a Hebrew? They were given the sacred word of Jehovah, of the Creator, of the Almighty. And it doesn't matter if you consider yourself adopted, grafted in, a sojourner. If you claim the God of Abraham, Jehovah, as your God, he will consider you equal to his children and treat you just like you were a child of Abraham. I won't get in trouble again, but that's okay. The problem most Christians have is their traditions, because those traditions have replaced Jehovah with Jesus. It's that simple. The same faith they claim, right? The same law that they claim has been done away with, the same law they claim was nailed to a cross, is the faith that their Jesus came to teach. He came to challenge the Pharisees and their traditions, because the Pharisees had made up rules and regulations that added to or subtracted from the faith that was once delivered. And because he said, don't listen to the Pharisees, you do what Moses said to do, they crucified him. They couldn't stand somebody having the audacity to stick their finger in their face, his finger in their face, and say, you have it wrong. They couldn't stand having somebody challenge their authority. Even when they themselves knew and understood what they were doing. It's just that simple. If you really love your traditions more than God, he will allow you to choose that. He's not going to stop you. If you want that more than me, you go right ahead. If you want to travel down that path instead of following my way, you go right ahead. He doesn't want somebody to say, I love, and then prove they love something else more by their actions. He wants you rather to show your love by your obedience to his instructions. Not my instructions, not mine, not Jerry's, not Myra's. Not your pastor's instructions, not your spouse's instructions, except don't forget whatever at the store, right? He wants you to show your obedience to his instructions, just like Daniel. Daniel was so faithful. He opened his window and he spoke to the Almighty, and he was thrown in the lion's den, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. While everybody else was bowing down to a great big statue, they didn't bow down. They stood up and stood out. Look what happened to them. But look at who was glorified at the end. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It was the Almighty himself. We know a lot of people who say they have faith, but when push comes to shove, they go right back to their comfort zone. I think the world has watched this happen for the entire couple of years we've been dealing with COVID, right? Oh, I have faith, but I'm going to go get this, or I'm going to go do that, or I'm going to trust this person, I'm going to trust that person. Instead of living the way you're designed to live and knowing that you will be protected, you will be fine. Yeah, you might get sick. But knowing that you're going to be protected, they go right back to what they were taught before. We see it today with family and friends. Will you pray for me? Will you, I don't feel good today. Will you pray for me? And then these same people say, will you pray for me? Get offended. I don't know if Myra's done this or not, but they get offended when I ask, are you willing to change what you were doing that got you into the situation you needed prayer for to start with? They're not. They're not. They don't want the Almighty's involvement in their life. Excuse me. They want some magic elixir, right? They want some magical incantation that's going to fix all their problems, and that's not the way it's supposed to work. You have to change and stop doing the evil stuff you're doing. Are you still going to have the scars? Yeah. Are you still going to have whatever? Yeah. But it will change you. Excuse me. In the United States today, yeah, we're going here. In the United States today, there's a lot of people who claim they're believers. They claim they believe the Bible. They claim, I want to live right, but they don't want to live righteously. If you look around at some of the politicians we have elected, okay? I won't get in trouble for this too, but that's all right. If you look at the politicians in the United States that have been elected, the people we voted for, we vote for people who put themselves above everybody else or everything else. Apparently, we vote for pro-choice candidates that want to kill babies. We vote for people who want us to give up the very freedom that this United States was built on. And here's a really good explanation of why I could never be a nonprofit. Because if you're a nonprofit, you have to agree not to say anything against certain things or certain people, right? And government's one of them. You can't tell people, don't vote for, pro-life because don't vote for pro-choice because it kills babies. You're not supposed to say that. My opinion, and I hope it's the opinion of a lot of people, there's a lot of politicians in the United States today who are more of a threat to the freedom of United States citizens than King George was to the freedom of the colonists during the 18th century, just prior to the American Revolution. And we can start right at the top. You might ask yourself now, what does that have to do with the faith that was once delivered? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because there's a lot of preachers out there who are a threat to that faith. Oh, they preach on one hand that the law's done away with, but you still got to tithe that 10%. Wait a minute. If that's been nailed to the cross, if that's been done away with, if it doesn't count anymore, why do I have to do that? By the way, God's Universe, God's Rules, I've got a chapter on that. Okay? So you can check that out. They have replaced the Creator with the created. They've replaced the Creator with evolution. They've replaced the Creator with a cross. And they have replaced the Creator far too often with themselves. You know, on one hand, they say, oh, money's bad, but you've got to give us all your money. Just send me $5. Just $5. That's all I want. If everybody just send me $5, well, you know, I'd love to have everybody send me $5 too. It would cure a lot of problems financially. Might create a few more, but it would cure some financial issues. You can't have it both ways. Now, I can go on and on about this, but I think you get the idea. So pastors who listen, and I know some of you do, stop trying to force the people you're supposed to be shepherding. Stop forcing them away from the best food and the fresh water. Let them lie down in the green pastures of the Creator's sacred word. Let them drink from a spring of water that will never run dry. Give them the faith they deserve, the faith that was once delivered to the saints, the covenant and the law. And then here's a challenge for you, pastors. Show them how to live by being the example. How easy it is to live the way we are designed to live by our Creator. I'll challenge you, pastors. If you believe the words recorded in Matthew 5:19 and 20, so then whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do likewise will be called least in the kingdom. But whoever practices, it means you got to do something. You can't just say it, you got to do it. Whoever practices and teaches them the faith that was delivered, will be called great in the kingdom. For I tell you that unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, and what were the scribes and Pharisees doing? They were adding to and subtracting from the faith, right? Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, meaning you don't take anything away from the law, you don't add anything to it. You know, you look at your traditions, and the ones that cause you to violate the covenant, maybe you shouldn't do those. Because unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom. The faith that was once delivered to the saints, the holy people, is the law and the covenant that Moses recorded. It is the way of our Creator. It is the way of Jehovah, and it leads to righteousness and to the kingdom that so many people want to build, so many people want to be part of, so many people, we've got to bring the kingdom of heaven on earth. Well, you're not going to do it if you keep replacing the faith with something other than the faith. It's just that simple. I'm going to tell on myself for a second. When I was young, and y'all know how young boys are, right? They do things, and then they give excuses, right? Well, when I tried some lame excuses with my father, he would say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. When you stand at the foot of the throne of grace, and you will, if you try some lame excuse, you're going to hear what you don't want to hear. You're going to hear, who are you and why are you still in front of me? Our Creator will not hear lame excuses. Now, he will listen to, I did the best I could with the information I had. I did everything I knew how to do. I did everything that was told to me. I as much as I could possibly do for the situation I was in, he'll hear that, and he'll look at you and he'll say, well done. And the rest of that, of course, is my good and faithful servant, which goes back to Joel, right? My manservants, my maidservants, well done, good and faithful servant. But if you try to say, but my pastor said all I had to do was, and that was all I needed, and I was good to go, why isn't my visa stamped? Why isn't all this other stuff done? What's going to happen? Who are you? And why are you here? You can't fool him. It's impossible to fool him. So, if you are really doing the best you're able to do, that's good. But if you're just trying to get by, maybe you should rethink your position. Maybe you should rethink your integrity, right? What do your actions show? I hope for your sake your actions display the faith that was once delivered. And I hope for your sake you're willing to examine your life and answer those questions appropriately. So until Thursday.
Yes, till Thursday.
We will be back on Thursday, and hopefully you will too. Don't forget, share this with the people who need it, because everybody needs to hear this. Till then, many, many blessings, everyone.